What if Issei become god of destruction after losing an unlocked Ultra Instinct? Act 1, Chapter 1. The sky above Ko Academy had turned the color of a bruise, deep purple bleeding into black, and Issei Hayate knew, even before he hit the ground for the 5th time, that this was not a fight he was going to win. He had lost track of how long the battle had lasted. Long enough that his sacred gear had cracked along its left gauntlet, a spiderweb of red light leaking out like blood from a wound that could not close. Long enough that Drake had gone quiet in his head, no longer shouting encouragement, only murmuring low and grim, the way a friend murmurs when there is nothing left to say. The enemy did not have a name Issei recognized. It called itself nothing at all. It was tall and pale and wrong in the way that nightmares are wrong, its silhouette flickering at the edges like a candle flame in wind, and every time Issei struck it, his fist passed through something that was not quite flesh and not quite shadow. It did not tire. It did not bleed. It simply watched him burn through everything he had, patient as a held breath. Rias screamed his name from somewhere behind the barrier that Aquino had thrown up in the last desperate seconds, and he heard it, he heard all of them, Kiba shouting for him to fall back, Asia crying, Kaniko's claws scraping uselessly against the shield of pale light that would not let her through. They had all tried. One by one they had tried, and one by one the enemy had put them down, not cruelly, not even angrily, but with the calm efficiency of something clearing debris from a road. Issei got up anyway. He always got up anyway. That was the one thing about him that had never changed, not since the day a fallen angel had put a spear of light through his chest in an empty park and left him to die alone. Getting up was not bravery, not really. It was the only thing he knew how to do when the alternative was staying down. Boosted gear, he rasped, and the gauntlet on his arm pulsed weakly, the light stuttering like a dying heartbeat. Come on. One more. Give me one more. Partner, Drake said, and for the first time in the fight, there was something in the dragon's voice that Issei had never heard before. It took him a moment to place it. It was sorrow. Partner, I am trying. I am giving you everything I have left. It is not enough. It has to be enough. Issei's voice cracked. He thought of Rias, of the promise he had made her 100 small ways over 100 small days, the promise that he would be strong enough, that she would never have to watch him fall and not get up. He thought of his mother making breakfast in a kitchen that felt impossibly far away right now, humming some pop song from the radio, utterly unaware that her son was about to die in a courtyard soaked with his own blood. It has to be enough, Drake. I don't get to lose. I don't get to leave them like this. The enemy tilted its head, an oddly gentle gesture, almost curious, and took a single unhurried step forward. Issei charged. He did not remember much of what happened next, not clearly, not in the shape of a story with a beginning and a middle. He remembered the taste of copper. He remembered light exploding somewhere near his ribs, and the sensation of the ground rushing up to meet him far too fast, and Rias's voice tearing itself apart on the other side of the barrier, as it finally gave way. He remembered thinking, with strange clarity, that the sky really was a very beautiful color, even now, even like this, and he remembered falling. Not the fall of a body hitting pavement. Something else. Something longer, and quieter, a sensation of dropping through the world itself, through the courtyard and the school and the ordinary architecture of his life, down into a darkness that did not feel like death so much as it felt like the space between one breath and the next, stretched out forever. He fell for what felt like years. He felt past memories he had not thought of in a decade, his father teaching him to ride a bicycle, the particular smell of the classroom in 4th grade, Rias's smile the very first time she had called him her servant, and meant it kindly. He fell past fear, and past grief, and eventually past even those, into something that was not quite peace but was at least very, very still. Then the falling stopped, and Issei Hayate opened his eyes in a place that should not have existed. It was not the ruined courtyard of Ko Academy. It was not the underworld, with its blood-colored sky and rolling black fields that Rias had shown him once. It was nowhere at all, an endless plain the color of a moment just before dawn, gray shading into the faintest violet at a horizon that seemed to curve away in every direction at once, as though he were standing on the inside of a sphere far too large to see the edges of. He tried to stand and found, to his surprise, that his body did not hurt. He looked down at himself. The wounds were gone. The cracked gauntlet was gone too, his arm bare and unremarkable, and for one long, disoriented moment he wondered if this was what dying actually felt like, quiet and clean and almost boring. "You're not dead," said a voice. Issei spun around so fast he nearly fell over again. There was a figure sitting a short distance away, cross-legged in the air itself, a few feet above the strange gray ground, as casually as if gravity were a suggestion rather than a rule. The figure was humanoid in shape but violet-skinned, with pointed ears and eyes the color of dried blood, dressed in something that looked less like armor and more like the ceremonial robes of a priest who had never once in his existence prayed to anything. There was no menace in the figure's posture. If anything, there was a bone-deep boredom to the way it sat there, chin propped on one hand, watching Issei the way a person might watch rain fall against a window. "You're not dead," the figure said again, "though you came close enough that the difference is mostly a technicality." "Interesting." Who? Issei's voice came out hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Who are you? Where am I? Where's Rias? Where's everyone I need to?" "They're fine. Or they will be, once that thing you were fighting gets bored and leaves, which it will, shortly, because you are no longer an interesting toy to break." The figure said this with the flat certainty of someone reading off a weather report. "As for where you are, that's a more complicated question. Call it the space between. A place that exists only when something like you happens to fall through the cracks of something like your world." Issei stared. None of this made any sense, and some small, exhausted part of him wanted very badly to sit down on the strange gray ground and simply refuse to process any more information today. "Something like me? Someone who was willing to die rather than stop standing up." The figure's blood-red eyes studied him with an attention that felt uncomfortably thorough, as though it were reading something written on the inside of his skull. "That's rarer than you'd think. Most creatures, when the pain gets bad enough, when the odds get bad enough, they find a reason to stay down. It's not cowardice. It's sense. Staying down is usually the smart thing to do." A pause. "You didn't do the smart thing. You never do, from what I've seen. That's why I'm here." "I don't understand any of this," Issei said, and hated how young his voice sounded. "I don't know what you are. I don't know what you want. I just want to go back. I have people who need me. They needed you an hour ago too, and you weren't strong enough to protect them then, were you?" The words were not cruel, exactly. They were worse than cruel. They were simply true, and the figure said them the way one might point out that water is wet. "I'm not here to mock you, boy. I'm here because I have a position that has been empty for longer than your entire species has existed, and you are, against every reasonable expectation I had walking into this conversation, a plausible candidate to fill it." Issei's mouth went dry. "What position?" The figure floated down until its bare feet touched the strange gray ground, and for the first time, something in its bearing shifted, the boredom sliding away to reveal something colder and vastly older underneath, a weight that pressed against the empty plane like gravity made visible. "Destruction," the figure said simply. "I am what your world's mythologies, on the rare occasions they brush close enough to the truth to notice me at all, call the god of destruction. There is one assigned to every universe that exists, a balance against the gods of creation, because a universe that only builds and never unmakes collapses under its own weight eventually. The way a house never once cleaned of its junk eventually cannot be lived in at all." The figure spread its hands, taking in the empty gray horizon in a small, tired gesture. "The one who held that role in the universe adjacent to yours vanished 3,000 of your years ago. No replacement has ever been found. Not because the power cannot be given, because the mind to hold it without breaking is almost impossible to find. And you think that's me?" Issei's laugh came out thin and disbelieving. "I'm not a god of anything. I'm a high school kid with a busted arm and a dragon stuck in my head who couldn't even land one clean hit on the thing that just kicked my ass. I'm the boosted gear guy who reads too many manga. I'm not, this isn't." "I know exactly what you are," the figure said, and there was, unexpectedly, something almost gentle underneath the words now. "I watched the last 20 minutes of that fight very closely. You were outmatched in every measurable way. Speed, strength, technique. And still you did not stop getting up, even when getting up meant nothing, even when getting up would only earn you another beating. because somewhere in that stubborn little head of yours, you had decided that your friends mattered more than your own survival, and that decision did not require you to win. It only required you to keep trying. The figure tilted its head. That is not nothing, boy. In 3,000 years of searching, I have met exactly one being capable of doing that without eventually breaking under the weight of it. You are looking at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and the vast gray plains sat silent around them, patient and enormous and empty. If I say yes, Issei said slowly, what happens? Power, the figure said. More than you have ever imagined holding, more than that dragon in your head has access to even in his own memories, because his memories only stretch as far as the strength of gods your world already knows. What I'm offering reaches further than that. It reaches all the way down to the root of what strength actually is. A pause, waited, deliberate. But power like that does not sit lightly on a mortal frame. It will change you, not your heart, not who you love or what you value. That part is yours and I would not touch it even if I could, but your body, your reach, the very shape of what you are capable of. And there will be a price beyond that, one I will not lie to you about, because I do not believe in lying to the people I choose. What price? Loneliness. The word landed heavier than Issei expected. The strength I am offering separates you from the world you knew, boy, whether you wanted to or not. Gods of destruction exist a half step outside the systems they oversee. You will still love your friends. You will still bleed for them, if it comes to that. But you will never again be simply one of them, shoulder to shoulder in the same fight on the same footing. Some part of you will always be standing a little apart now, watching over rather than standing beside. That is the cost. I will not pretend otherwise. Issei thought of Ryusa's voice tearing itself raw on the other side of a barrier that had not been strong enough. He thought of Asia crying his name. He thought of every single time in the last year he had stood in front of the people he loved and known, with sick certainty, that he was not enough to keep them safe, that one day the gap between what he could do and what they needed would finally catch up to all of them. If I say no, he said quietly, what happens to them? To Rias, to everyone. Right now. Today, that thing you were fighting will grow bored within the hour and leave, as I said. Today they live, but it will come back, boy, or something like it will, because the balance in your world has been broken for a long time, longer than you know, and things that thrive in broken balances always come sniffing around eventually looking for more to take. Today they live. I cannot promise you tomorrow. No one could promise you that even before any of this happened, if you're being honest with yourself. Issei closed his eyes. He thought about being smart. He thought about staying down, the way the figure had said, the sensible thing. The thing that would let him wake up back in his own body with his own name, and no strange violet god pressing enormous unwanted destiny into his open hands. Then he thought about getting up anyway, one more time, because that was the only thing he had ever really known how to do. Okay, he said, and his voice did not shake. Teach me. Whatever it costs. Teach me how to protect them properly this time. The figure studied him for a long, long moment, red eyes unreadable, and then, very slightly, one corner of its mouth curved upward, something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. My name, the figure said, in the tongue of the universe I once watched over, translates roughly to silence between storms. You may call me that, or nothing at all, since I doubt I will remain in a form you can address casually for very much longer. What I am about to give you cannot be taken back once it is given. Are you certain, Issei Hayadu? Yes, Issei said, and did not hesitate. Silence between storms raised one violet hand, and the enormous gray plain around them began, very quietly, to unravel at the edges like the last thread pulled from an old sweater. And the last thing Issei heard before the world went white was the god's voice, almost gentle now, saying, Then let us begin unmaking the boy you used to be, so that something stronger can stand in his place. Chapter 2. Pain, when it came, did not come the way Issei expected. He had braced for fire. He had braced for something like the agony of the boosted gear's balance breaker tearing through his nervous system, a familiar violence he at least understood the shape of. What came instead was pressure, an enormous, patient, planetary weight settling into every cell of his body at once, as though the universe itself were leaning down to rearrange his bones one careful millimeter at a time. It did not feel like being destroyed. It felt like being poured out of one container and into a much, much larger one, and the process of expanding to fill that new shape hurt in a way that had no relation at all to pain as he had previously understood the word. He was aware, distantly, of Drake screaming somewhere in the back of his skull, not in agony but in something closer to awe, the dragon's ancient voice cracking under the weight of what it was witnessing. Partner, what is happening? This power. This is not anything I have ever felt, not from the two heavenly dragons, not from the original Satans, not from anything. I don't know, Issei tried to say, though he was no longer certain he had a mouth to say it with. I don't know, I just said yes, Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped, and Issei Hayato was standing once more on the endless gray plain, except now the plain itself seemed smaller somehow, or perhaps he simply took up more space within it, and Silence Between Storms was watching him with an expression that, for the first time since they had met, looked almost surprised. Well, the god said. That is not the reaction I anticipated. Issei looked down at his hands. They looked the same. Ordinary teenage hands, a little callous from years of training, nothing about them screaming godhood or destruction or any of the enormous words that had just been poured into him. But when he flexed his fingers, he felt something underneath the skin that had not been there before, a low, constant hum, like standing near an enormous engine that had just been switched on and was still warming up. What did you do to me? He said. It was not quite an accusation. He was too disoriented to manage a proper accusation. I opened a door, Silence Between Storms said. I did not carry you through it. That part, you will have to do yourself, and it will take time, more time than you probably want to hear about. What I have given you is potential, boy, not mastery. The strength of a god of destruction, waiting in you the way a seed waits in soil, doing nothing at all until you learn to want it correctly. The god paused, tilting its head in that same considering way from before. Most who receive this gift spend centuries learning to access even a fraction of it. You do not have centuries. Your world does not have centuries. So we will have to be creative. Creative how? There is another gift buried in what I gave you, the god said, one I did not put there on purpose, one that surprised even me, which is a rare enough occurrence that you should feel appropriately significant about causing it. A ghost of something like amusement crossed the ancient face. You are familiar, I assume, with the idea of instinct. The reactions your body makes before your mind has finished deciding to make them. The hand that catches a falling object before the eye has finished registering that it fell. Sure. I guess. When I poured destruction into you, boy, I poured in something else along with it, almost by accident, the way spilled water sometimes carries the shape of the container it fell from. A different kind of power. One built not on force, but on the complete and total absence of hesitation. A state where the body moves without the burden of fear, without the burden of doubt, without the burden of thought getting in its own way at the worst possible moment. Your world, and the stories it tells itself, sometimes brushes close to the concept without ever fully grasping it. You might have heard it called, in some far corner of some far story, an instinct beyond instinct. A movement so pure it does not require permission from the mind at all. Issei's breath caught. Somewhere, distantly, buried under a decade of manga and late nights and half-remembered anime marathons with Matsuda and Motohama, something in him recognized the shape of what the god was describing, even if he could not name it properly yet. You are calling it something already. I can see it on your face, Silence Between Storms said, sounding faintly delighted despite itself. Good. Names have power, even borrowed ones. Hold on to whatever word you're thinking of. You'll need it when the time comes to reach for this properly, because reaching for it on command is nearly impossible. It surfaces first in the space between life and death, when the mind finally, blessedly, gets out of the body's way. So I can't just use it whenever I want. No. Not at first. Perhaps not ever fully, though I have hopes for you that I am trying very hard not to examine too closely, because hope is an emotion that has caused me a great deal of trouble over the centuries. The god's tone shifted, becoming brisker, more businesslike, the tone of someone laying out a curriculum. Here is what will happen. I am sending you back. Your body in your world is, as we speak, lying broken in a courtyard, and your friends are, as we speak, doing everything they know how to do to keep you alive long enough for that to matter. You will wake there, in pain, ordinary pain, mortal pain, because the gift I have given you does not erase what you already were. It only adds to it. And then what? And then you train, the god said, the way every fool who has ever been given power beyond their understanding has trained since the beginning of every story ever told about such fools, which is to say, badly at first, and with a great deal of falling down, and slowly, better. A pause. I will not be able to walk beside you for most of it. My attention is needed elsewhere, in places you do not yet have the context to understand, and there is only so much of myself I can spare for one mortal boy, however promising. But I will come when I can, and there is something else waiting for you back in your world already, something I did not put there, something that predates my gift by a considerable margin, that may be able to help in ways I cannot. What's that? Silence between storms smiled, small and strange and, for just a moment, almost fond. You'll know it when you feel it, the god said. Now. Wake up, Issei Hayadu. Your friends are calling for you, and it would be rude, at this point in the story, to keep them waiting any longer. The great plain dissolved around him like sugar in water, and the last thing Issei felt before the darkness took him again was an enormous, gentle hand, too large to belong to any single finger, too vast to belong to any single shape, resting for just a moment against the center of his chest, as though checking that his heart was still beating properly before letting him go. Then there was only white light, and Rias's voice, closer now, so much closer, screaming his name like it was the only word left in the world. Chapter 3. He woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the particular blue-white light of the school infirmary's ceiling panels, and for a long, disoriented moment, Issei genuinely believed the entire thing had been a fever dream, a concussion hallucination brought on by getting his head caved in one too many times. Then he tried to sit up, and the world tilted sideways, and Rias's face appeared above him so suddenly it was as though she had been standing over him the entire time, unmoving, unblinking, for however long he had been out. Don't move, she said, and her voice was wrecked, hoarse from screaming, her eyes red-rimmed in a way that made something in Issei's chest ache far worse than any of his physical wounds. Issei, you idiot, don't you dare move, you were. Her voice cracked entirely, and she pressed both hands over her mouth for a moment, composing herself with visible effort. You were barely breathing when we got you inside. Aquino couldn't fully close the wounds. We didn't know if. I'm okay, Issei said, though his voice came out little more than a croak. I'm okay, Bucho. I'm here. You are not okay, said Aquino, appearing on his other side, her usual playful lilt entirely absent, replaced by something flat and exhausted. You have 3 fractured ribs, a punctured lung that only just finished healing itself somehow, which by the way should not have been medically possible in the time you were unconscious, and enough internal bruising that Asia cried for 20 minutes straight trying to fix all of it. She paused. You were dead for 11 seconds, Issei-kun. We felt it. Your presence just stopped. And then it came back. Issei absorbed this in silence. 11 seconds. He thought about the endless gray plain, about a violet-skinned god with dried blood eyes, about a promise made and a door open that he did not yet know how to walk through. There's something I need to tell you guys, he said slowly. Something happened. When I was gone. I don't really know how to explain it, he told them. Haltingly at first, and then in a rush, the words tumbling out faster than he could properly organize them. The endless gray plain, the god who called itself silence between storms, the offer, the price, the strange new hum sitting beneath his skin like an engine warming up. Rias listened with her jaw tight and her hands clenched in her lap. Aquino's expression grew progressively more unreadable. Kiba, standing near the door with his arms crossed, went very still, the particular stillness of a swordsman calculating threat. Asia, small and pale by the foot of the bed, simply looked terrified, and Kaneko, perched in the corner with her knees drawn up to her chest, said nothing at all, though her ears, still faintly visible in her half-transformed state from the fight, had flattened against her skull. A god of destruction, Rias said finally, very quietly, when he had finished. Issei. Do you understand what you're describing? Do you understand what that word means in the systems of power I was raised to understand? That is not a rank. That is not a class of being like a Satan or a Longinus wielder or even one of the old dragon kings. That is a category error. That is something that should not exist inside the framework my family has spent 1,000 years learning to navigate. I know it sounds insane, Issei said. Believe me, I know. But Bucho, I felt it. I still feel it. Something's different, something's. He held up one hand, staring at it as though it might suddenly begin glowing on command, which, disappointingly, it did not. I don't know how to explain it better than that. I just know I'm not the same as I was yesterday. He's telling the truth, Drake rumbled, his voice audible to all of them now through the cracked but functioning gauntlet still fused to Issei's arm, and there was something in the ancient dragon's tone that Issei had genuinely never heard before across their entire partnership. Uncertainty. The Welsh dragon, terror of legends, sounded uncertain. I was there, in whatever sense a bonded spirit can be present for such a thing. I do not have words for what I witnessed. I have lived for centuries. I fought beside and against gods when your world's mythologies were still being written for the first time, and I have never, not once, felt power like what poured into my host in that great place. I do not fully understand it. I do not know its limits. I only know it is real, and it is inside him now, and it is not going away. Silence fell over the infirmary. Somewhere outside, a bird sang, absurdly, cheerfully, oblivious to the enormity of the conversation happening inside. Okay, Rhea said eventually, and there was steel returning to her voice now, the particular steel of a young woman who had spent her whole life learning to make decisions under impossible pressure. Okay, whatever this is, whatever it means, we will figure it out together, the way we figure out everything else. You are still Issei. That has not changed, whatever power is or isn't sitting under your skin now. That is the only part of this that actually matters to me. She reached out and took his hand, gripping it hard enough to hurt, hard enough that Issei understood, without her having to say it, exactly how badly she had needed to touch something solid and alive and undeniably him. But I need you to promise me something, anything. Do not go looking for a fight to test this out. Her eyes bored into his, fierce and frightened at once. Do not go looking for danger because some part of you thinks you need to prove that whatever you were given was worth the price. We nearly lost you today. I am not interested in nearly losing you again next week because you decided to go poke something enormous to see what happens. Issei managed a weak, exhausted smile. No promises on the poking part. But I hear you, Bucho. I'll be careful. I don't even know how to use any of this yet anyway. The god guy said it doesn't just switch on. Says I have to sort of grow into it. Then we'll help you grow into it, Kiba said from the doorway, uncrossing his arms at last, something like resolve settling over his handsome features. Whatever training that requires. Whatever it looks like. You're not doing this alone, Issei. None of us are letting you do this alone. Damn straight, came a new voice from the hallway, and a moment later Zenobia pushed the door open the rest of the way, Irina trailing just behind her. Both of them still in torn and singed combat gear from the fight, both of them looking at Issei with an expression that mixed relief and wariness in roughly equal measure. We felt something during the fight, after you went down. A pressure, like the air itself, got heavier for a second, and then that thing we were fighting just left. Didn't finish us off, didn't press the advantage, just turned around and walked away like it had suddenly lost interest in the entire encounter. Zenobia crossed her arms, studying Issei with narrowed eyes. I don't suppose that has anything to do with whatever cosmic nonsense you're apparently now wrapped up in. Probably, Issei admitted. The god thing, silence between storms, it said the enemy would get bored and leave once I wasn't interesting to fight anymore. I guess dying counts as not interesting. Comforting, Irina muttered. Asia, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke, her voice small but steady. Issei-san. Whatever this power is. Whatever it costs you. We're not going to let you carry it by yourself. That's not how this group works. That's not how you taught us this group works. Something tight and painful loosened in Issei's chest at that, some knot of fear he had not even fully realized he was carrying, the fear that this new, strange, enormous thing living inside him would somehow separate him from the people he loved before he had even had the chance to understand it himself. Thank you, he said quietly, and meant it more than he had meant almost anything in his life. All of you. I mean it. Rias squeezed his hand once more, and then, very deliberately, let the steel in her posture soften back into something warmer, something exhausted and human and relieved. Rest, she said. Whatever training this power needs, it can wait until tomorrow. Tonight you're just going to lie here and let us take care of you, and you are not going to argue about it. Issei, for once in his life, did not argue. Chapter 4. The dream came 3 nights later, and it did not feel like a dream at all. Issei found himself standing in the endless gray plain again, except this time it was not empty. Silence between storms stood a short distance away, arms folded, watching something that hovered in the air between them, a small, spinning sphere of pale violet light, no larger than a marble, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. You're healing faster than a mortal body should, the god said without preamble, by way of greeting. Your ribs, which should have taken 6 weeks to fully mend, are already sound. Your reflexes, when your friends spar with you, are measurably sharper than they were a week ago, though you have not consciously noticed this yet because the change has been gradual enough to feel normal. The seed I planted is beginning to root. Good. That is faster than I expected. I don't feel any different, Issei said, though even as he said it, he wondered if that was entirely true. You will not for a while. Power like this does not announce itself with fireworks, not in the early stages. It arrives quietly, the way muscle grows quietly, the way habits form quietly, one repetition at a time until suddenly you look back and realize you are no longer the person you were a month ago. The god gestured at the small spinning sphere of light. This is a training space. Not a physical place, not truly, though your body will register the exhaustion as real because your mind cannot easily tell the difference. I intend to use it to teach you the beginning of what I promised, the instinct beyond instinct. Are you ready? Issei squared his shoulders, feeling the familiar hum beneath his skin, no longer entirely unfamiliar now, more like a tool he had recently acquired and had not yet learned to hold correctly. Ready. Then let us begin with the only lesson that matters at the start, silence between storms said, and the small violet sphere expanded outward in an instant, swallowing the whole of the gray plain in blinding light, and when Issei's vision cleared, the god was gone, and in its place stood something else entirely. It was humanoid vaguely, built along proportions that were almost right and subtly, unsettlingly wrong, its surface the color of whetstone, its eyes twin points of dull red light. It moved before Issei had time to brace, closing the distance in a blur, one clawed hand already swinging for his skull. Issei threw himself backward on pure animal reflex, felt the claws pass close enough to stir his hair, and scrambled up onto his feet with his heart hammering. What the hell was that? No warning, nothing. Warnings are a courtesy the universe rarely extends, silence between storms said, its voice now emanating from the stone-skinned construct itself, calm and unbothered even as it advanced again. You will not learn what I am trying to teach you by thinking about it calmly in a quiet room. You will learn it here, at the edge of your own survival, because that is the only place this particular kind of power has ever been willing to surface, in your world or in any other. Fight, Issei Haidu. Fight until thinking stops helping you. The construct attacked again, and again, relentless, patient, never quite fast enough to actually harm him, but always fast enough to force him backward, off balance, breathing hard within minutes despite the dream logic of the space around him. Issei fought back as best he could, throwing punches that connected with stone-hard flesh and did almost nothing, dodging blows that grew incrementally faster each time, feeling his own exhaustion mount in a body that should not have been capable of exhaustion in a dream at all. Minutes bled into what felt like hours. He lost count of how many times the construct's claws grazed him, how many times he hit the gray ground hard enough to see stars, how many times he pushed himself back up only to be knocked down again almost immediately. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small, exhausted voice began asking why he was bothering to keep standing up at all, in a dream, against an opponent that clearly could not be beaten through effort alone. He ignored the voice. He always ignored that voice. Again, silence between storms said, and the construct came at him one more time, faster now than it had ever moved before, claws already arcing toward his throat. And Issei's exhausted mind simply did not have time to process a plan, did not have time to calculate an angle or choose a defense. And in the absence of thought, something else took over. His body moved. It was not a decision. There was no moment of choosing. One instant the claws were an inch from his throat, and the next, without any awareness of having decided to do so, Issei's head had tilted a fraction to the side, his shoulder had rolled, his weight had shifted, and the claws passed harmlessly through empty air where his throat had been a heartbeat before. His own hand, moving with the same unclaimed certainty, came up and struck the construct square in the chest, and for the first time in the entire fight, the stone-skinned thing actually staggered backward. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Issei was aware of his own body as though from a slight distance, watching himself move with a fluid, unhesitating grace that had nothing to do with any training he had ever consciously undertaken, every motion arriving a fraction of a second before he could have possibly planned it, his mind blessedly, wonderfully quiet, no fear in it, no doubt, only the clean, silent certainty of a body that had stopped waiting for permission. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone, and Issei stumbled, the ordinary weight of thought and fatigue crashing back down over him all at once, and he dropped to one knee, gasping, as the construct dissolved back into violet light and reformed into the familiar shape of silence between storms, watching him with an expression that, for the ancient god, looked remarkably close to satisfaction. There it is, the god said softly. Barely a heartbeat, and clumsy at the edges, but there it is. You felt it, didn't you? The stillness. Yeah, Issei managed, still catching his breath. Yeah, I felt it. What was that? What happened to me? That, silence between storms said, was the very first, faintest edge of the gift I told you about. A glimpse of what it feels like to move without the burden of your own mind getting in the way. You will not be able to summon it on command, not for a long time, perhaps not for years, because it only surfaces in the narrow gap between exhaustion and death, the place where thought finally, mercifully, runs out of road. But you have touched it now. You know the shape of it. And a thing once touched can always, eventually, be reached for again. The gods studied him with something almost like pride. You are ahead of schedule, Issei Hayadu. Considerably ahead. I confess I did not expect that. Issei managed a tired, crooked grin, even as every muscle in his dream body screamed with the strange, dream-logic exhaustion of a fight he was fairly sure had not been physically real and yet had hurt every bit as much as if it had been. Guess I'm just stubborn. Guess you are, the god agreed, and there was, unmistakably now, warmth in its ancient voice. Rest, boy. We will do this again tomorrow night, and the night after, and the night after that, for as long as it takes, because the gap between what you can do now and what your world is going to need from you eventually is still very, very wide. But tonight you have earned your rest. The gray plain dissolved into soft, formless dark, and Issei sank gratefully into it, and somewhere very far away, in a bedroom in the human world, his sleeping body's breathing slowed and deepened, and for the first time in nearly a week, he slept without dreaming of falling. Chapter 5. 2 weeks passed in something that almost resembled normal life, if normal life included nightly training sessions in an endless gray dreamscape against an ever-shifting parade of monstrous constructs summoned by an ancient god of destruction. By day, Issei went to class, endured Matsuda and Motohama's usual nonsense, sat through Ryasa's careful, worried check-ins, and trained physically with Kiba and Zenobia in the old schoolhouse basement, sparring sessions that Ryasa insisted on supervising personally, always with Akino standing ready nearby, magic humming faintly in her fingertips, just in case. He was getting stronger. Even without the dream training, even setting aside whatever strange gift was slowly rooting itself into his body, his reflexes had sharpened noticeably, his stamina had grown, his punches landed with an authority that made even Kiba's practiced defenses stagger on occasion. But it was the nights that mattered most, the nights where he chased that fleeting, unclaimable stillness through fight after fight after fight, catching it for a heartbeat here, 2 heartbeats there, before it slipped away again into the ordinary noise of a frightened, thinking mind. It was on the 15th night that everything changed. He was deep into a training session, exhausted past the point of clear thought, facing down a construct larger and faster than any silence between storms had summoned before, when he felt it happen again. That blessed silence descending over his mind, his body moving without him, dodging and countering with a fluid certainty that felt less like fighting and more like dancing to music only he could hear. But this time, It did not fade after a single heartbeat. It held. 2 seconds. 5. 10. Issei watched, from somewhere pleasantly detached inside his own skull, as his body wove between the construct's attacks with an ease that bordered on contemptuous, landing blow after blow, each one finding its mark with an accuracy that no amount of conscious effort could have produced. Somewhere beneath the silence, a small, distant part of him registered astonishment. The rest of him simply moved. The fight ended with the construct dissolving into scattered violet light, and the stillness in Issei's mind held for one more long, floating moment before finally, gently, releasing him back into ordinary awareness, leaving him standing in the gray plain, breathing hard, staring at his own hands as though they belonged to a stranger. Silence Between Storms was watching him with an expression Issei had genuinely never seen on the ancient face before. Something close to wonder. 10 seconds, the god said quietly. You held it for 10 full seconds, unbroken, against an opponent I built specifically to be beyond your current skill. Do you understand how remarkable that is, boy? I have watched beings train toward this exact state for lifetimes, plural, entire successive incarnations, and never once seen it stabilize this quickly. It felt different this time, Issei admitted, still staring at his hands. Like something clicked. Like I finally understood what you meant by getting out of my own way. Whatever you understood, Silence Between Storms said, hold on to it. Because I think, Issei Hayato, that you are on the verge of something your world has never seen before, and possibly something my own world's stories only ever brushed against and whispered. Half-forgotten legend. A state beyond simple reflex. A state your instincts might eventually learn to hold not for 10 seconds, but indefinitely. A true, waking stillness, carried into every motion of an entire battle. The god's blood-red eyes gleamed with something that was, for the first time since Issei had met this ancient, weary being, unmistakably excitement. There is an old name for that state, one that predates even my own memory, whispered in the oldest corners of the oldest universes. I do not know if it is the correct name for what is rising in you, but I think, when the moment comes, you will know it when you feel it. What's it called? The god smiled, small and strange and full of something that might have been hope. Ultra Instinct, Silence Between Storms said softly, and the words seemed to hang in the gray air between them like the first notes of a song not yet finished being written. Reach for it, Issei Hayato. Keep reaching. I think, before this is over, your world is going to need every last inch of what you're capable of becoming. Somewhere far below, in the human world, in a modest bedroom in an ordinary house, Issei Hayato's sleeping body stirred, and for the first time in his life, dreamed of a stillness so complete it felt like standing at the very center of the universe, untouched by fear, unbothered by doubt, ready, at last, to become something the world had never seen before. He did not know yet what waited for him beyond the horizon of that stillness. He did not know about the storms gathering in the underworld, about the old enemies watching his growth with fresh and calculating interest, about the new threats his sudden, impossible power would inevitably draw out of hiding like moths to an unexpected flame. He only knew, waking the next morning to sunlight and the ordinary smell of his mother's cooking drifting up the stairs, that something inside him had shifted permanently, quietly, and completely, and that whatever came next, he intended to meet it standing up. Chapter 6. The call came on a Tuesday, which Issei would later think was a strange, almost insulting detail to remember about the day everything tipped over into something new. Tuesdays were supposed to be boring. Tuesdays were supposed to mean math homework and Matsuda complaining about the volleyball club and nothing more dramatic than whether the cafeteria had run out of curry bread again. Instead, Ryusa's phone rang during afternoon club activities, and Issei watched her face change as she listened, watched the color drain slowly out of it, watched her knuckles whiten around the phone until he half expected the plastic casing to crack under her grip. Understood, she said finally, her voice carefully, deliberately flat in the way it only ever got when she was working very hard not to sound afraid. We'll be ready. Thank you for the warning. She lowered the phone and looked around the clubroom at all of them, Akino already straightening from her seat by the window, Kiba's hand drifting instinctively toward the hilt of his sword, Kaneko going very still and very alert in the corner. That was my brother's office, Rhea said. There's been an incident in the underworld. Something came through one of the old boundary points, the kind that hasn't been active in centuries, and it did not come through quietly. 3 border outposts are gone. Not damaged, gone, as in no longer structurally present, as though something simply erased the space they were occupying. She swallowed. Whatever it was has moved on since, but the pattern of destruction matches a signature nobody in the underworld's archives has on file. Surzex wants every peerage with combat experience on alert. He specifically asked about you, Issei. About whether the power you told us about has stabilized enough to be useful if this thing comes anywhere near Ko. The clubroom went very quiet. Issei felt the old, familiar hum beneath his skin, the one that had been growing steadily louder over the past 2 weeks, and for the first time, it did not feel like an abstract, half-understood gift waiting patiently to be unwrapped. It felt like a question being asked directly of him, immediate and real. How far out is it, he asked? The thing that hit the outposts. Unknown. It could be anywhere in the underworld by now, or it could already be gone entirely, back through whatever boundary point let it in the first place. That's the trouble with an erasure signature like this. There's no trail to follow in any conventional sense. It doesn't leave footprints. It leaves absences. Rias's eyes found his, steady despite the fear plainly visible underneath. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, not bravely. Do you feel ready for something like this? Not eventually. Now. Issei thought about the endless gray plain, about 10 unbroken seconds of perfect, silent motion, about a god's voice speaking a name that still sent a small shiver down his spine every time he thought about it. Ultra instinct. He thought about how far he still had to go before that name meant anything close to what it clearly could mean, someday, if he kept reaching for it the way silence between storms had told him to. No, he admitted, and it cost him something to say it plainly instead of puffing his chest out the way the old Issei might have. I'm not ready for whatever did that to 3 outposts. Not yet, but I'm not going to sit here and hide behind that either. If this thing comes near Ko, near any of you, I'm not going to be the guy standing in the back hoping somebody else handles it. Whatever I've got, even if it's not enough yet, I'll use every bit of it. Something in Rias's expression softened, fear and pride tangled together in a way that made Issei's chest ache. That's all I needed to hear, she said quietly. Everyone. Full alert tonight. Kiba, I want patrol routes mapped around the school perimeter, and the old church grounds both. Akino, keep a barrier ward active around the dormitories after dark, the strongest one you can maintain without exhausting yourself, because I need you sharp if something actually happens, not drained from precaution. Kaneko, Asia, stay close to the main group at all times, no exceptions tonight. She drew a slow breath, gathering the last of her composure around her like armor. We do this together. We always do this together. That has not changed, and it is not going to change tonight. Nobody argued. Nobody ever really argued with Rias when her voice took on that particular tone, the tone of a king who intended to bring every single one of her pieces home. Night fell heavy and quiet over Ko, the kind of stillness that felt less like peace and more like the world holding its breath. Issei walked the school perimeter with Kiba a little after midnight, both of them silent for long stretches, listening to nothing but their own footsteps and the distant hum of insects in the summer dark. Can I ask you something? Kiba said eventually, breaking the silence without looking over. About the power. About what it's actually like. Having something that big sitting inside you. Something none of us can really share or understand the way we understand a sacred gear or a devil's magic. Issei considered the question honestly before answering. It's lonely, he admitted. Not all the time. Most of the time it's just quiet, like carrying around a really heavy backpack you've mostly gotten used to the weight of. But sometimes, when I'm training with the god at night, when I'm reaching for that stillness he talks about, it feels like standing somewhere none of you can follow me to. Not because I don't want you there, just because the place doesn't have room for anyone else. He glanced sideways at his friend. Silence between storms warned me about that part. Said it was the price. I didn't really understand what he meant until I actually felt it. Kiba nodded slowly, thoughtful. For what it's worth, he said, you can tell us about the lonely parts. Even if we can't follow you all the way in, we can still listen from wherever we are standing. That's not nothing, Issei. Issei managed a small, tired smile. Yeah. I know. Thanks, man. They had nearly completed the second full circuit of the perimeter when the air changed. It was subtle at first, a pressure drop so faint Issei almost dismissed it as imagination, the kind of thing you might feel right before a storm broke somewhere far off on the horizon. Then Kiba stopped dead in his tracks, hand flying to his sword, eyes fixed on a patch of empty air near the old-school gate that had, until a heartbeat ago, been simply empty air, and was now, very quietly, no longer empty at all. The space did not open like a portal or crack like a door. It simply stopped being present, a neat, seamless absence roughly the height and width of a tall man, and out of that absence stepped something that made every hair on Issei's body stand on end at once, an instinctive, animal recognition of danger that had nothing to do with conscious thought. It was humanoid barely, its form built of shifting dark matter that seemed to swallow the moonlight around it rather than reflect it, its face a smooth, featureless oval save for 2 points of cold white light where eyes might have been. It did not look at Kiba at all. It turned, with unhurried, almost curious deliberation, directly toward Issei, as though it had come to this particular gate, on this particular night, looking for exactly him. Issei, Kiba breathed, already dropping into a defensive stance, sword sliding free of its sheath with a soft, deadly hiss. That's it. That has to be it. The erasure signature, it matches. The dark figure tilted its featureless head, and a voice emerged from it that was not quite sound so much as pressure applied directly to the inside of the skull, ancient and hollow, and entirely without warmth. Destruction, the voice said, the single word settling over the night air like frost. I felt you stir, 3,000 years dormant, waking again in a body far too small to hold you properly. I have come a very long way to see what a god crammed into a child looks like up close. Issei felt the hum beneath his skin surge upward, sharp and sudden, his heartbeat roaring in his ears, and somewhere very far away and yet closer than his own thoughts, he felt silence between storms stir, distant, watching, unable or unwilling to intervene directly, the way a teacher watches a student walk alone into an exam they have spent weeks preparing for and cannot now sit for them. Kiba, Issei said quietly, not taking his eyes off the dark figure for even a fraction of a second, get everyone else. Now. Don't engage this thing alone, don't let anyone else engage it alone either. I need you all safe while I figure out what this is. Issei, I am not leaving you to face that thing by yourself, please. Issei's voice cracked just slightly, just enough to carry every ounce of the fear he refused to let show on his face. Trust me. I need to know if any of what I've been training for actually means anything, and I need to know it without worrying about you getting hurt while I find out. Go. I'll hold it off. I promise I'll hold it off. Kiba hesitated one long, agonized second, and then, jaw tight, nodded once and sprinted back toward the old school building, shouting for Rias into the night as he went. The dark figure watched him go without concern, its cold white eyes never leaving Issei's face. Alone now, the voice observed, almost pleased. Good. I did not travel this far to watch you hide behind mortal shields. Issei rolled his shoulders, feeling the hum beneath his skin climb higher, feeling something ancient and enormous stir at the very edges of his awareness, not yet awake, not yet answering his call, but listening, at last, closely. Guess we're about to find out what I'm made of, then, Issei said, and the old, familiar grin found its way back onto his face despite everything, stubborn and unbowed, the same grin that had gotten back up after every single loss in his entire life. Come on, then. Let's see if 3,000 years of waiting was worth it. The dark figure moved, and the night around Ko Academy came apart at the seams. Chapter 7. Rias arrived at the gate less than 90 seconds after Kiba's warning reached her, Aquino and Zenobia close on her heels, magic already crackling bright and furious around her clenched fists, and what she found there stopped her cold. The old school gate was gone, not destroyed, not broken, simply erased, a clean circular absence eaten out of the stone pillars and iron bars as though some enormous invisible mouth had taken a single, careless bite out of the world. The ground around the absence was scorched in a wide, uneven ring, grass and gravel alike blackened and smoking, and at the center of it all stood Issei, breathing hard, one arm hanging slightly wrong at his side, staring across the ruined gateway at a figure of shifting black matter that stood utterly still, watching him with those 2 cold points of white light. Issei. Rias's voice tore across the wreckage, raw with fear. Stay back. he called without turning, without taking his eyes off the dark figure for even an instant. Bucho, please stay back. This isn't like anything we've fought before. I need you all out of range. Interesting, the hollow voice murmured, seemingly to itself, though every word carried easily across the ruined courtyard. 3 exchanges, and already the ground remembers you were here. That is more than most manage on their first night. The god who woke inside you chose better than I expected. You know silence between storms, Issei said, forcing steadiness into his voice even as his cracked arm throbbed in protest, even as exhaustion dragged at every limb. You said his name back at the beginning. You know what he is. I know what he was, the figure corrected softly. Before he lost his own universe to something very much like me. Before he spent 3,000 years searching every broken corner of every dying reality for a vessel worthy of trying again. He found one this time. That much I will grant you. It does not change what happens here tonight. Rias took a single furious step forward, and Aquino's hand shot out, catching her wrist, holding her back with a grip that trembled with restrained violence of its own. Bucho, Aquino said quietly, urgently, look at the ground. Look at what it did to stone. If we go in there untrained against whatever that is, we die, and Issei dies trying to protect us while doing it. He asked us to trust him? We have to trust him. Every muscle in Rias's body screamed against the idea of standing still while someone she loved faced down something monstrous alone. And yet, watching Issei plant his feet against the scorched earth, watching him roll his aching shoulder and settle into a stance that was somehow both familiar and utterly new, some fragment of the old, ordinary boy who used to trip over his own gym shoes fused now with something vast and quiet and waiting just beneath the surface, she found herself, against every instinct, holding still. Issei felt them behind him, felt their fear and their fierce, stubborn faith in him pressing warm against his back even from a distance, and he let it settle into him, not as pressure, but as fuel. The dark figure raised one shifting hand, matter coiling and uncoiling around its fingers like smoke given weight, and began, unhurried, to close the distance between them once more. Issei closed his eyes for the space of a single heartbeat, reaching, the way silence between storms had taught him to reach, past the fear screaming at the edges of his mind, past the ache in his ribs and the tremble in his hands, down into the quiet, waiting stillness he had touched for the first time only a handful of nights ago, the stillness that did not yet have a permanent name in this world, though he had been given one to hold on to anyway. For a single, suspended instant, everything went perfectly, impossibly silent. Then his eyes opened, and something in them had changed, something silver-edged and calm and utterly, finally unafraid, and Issei Hayate moved to meet the dark before it could reach him first. The God of Destruction's boosted gear. Act 2, Chapter 8. The dark figure did not so much move as arrive, closing the gap between them in a single stride that should have covered 30 feet, and somehow covered it as though the distance had simply been folded away. And Issei met it with his mind perfectly, terribly quiet. He did not think about the punch. He did not calculate the angle or brace for the impact. His body simply knew, the way a leaf knows to fall, and he slipped inside the arc of the creature's swinging arm and drove his fist into the center of its chest with every ounce of force the strange new power beneath his skin was willing to lend him. The impact cracked across the courtyard like thunder. The dark figure staggered backward, its featureless face tilting in what might have been surprise, black matter rippling and reforming around the point where Issei's fist had struck, and for one bright, electric second, Issei let himself believe he had actually heard it. Then it laughed, if the hollow, pressureless sound could be called a laugh at all, and struck back so fast that even the stillness in Issei's mind barely kept pace. A backhand blow that caught him across the ribs and sent him skidding 20 feet across the scorched ground, the world spinning white with pain as he came to a stop against what remained of the old gate's stone foundation. Issei! Rias's scream tore across the courtyard again, and this time Aquino's grip on her wrist visibly strained, both of them held back only by will and the desperate hope that he could still turn this. Issei forced himself upright, spitting blood, ribs screaming with every breath, and found the dark figure watching him with what could only be described, in its strange featureless way, as genuine interest. You held the stillness for almost 4 seconds that time, the hollow voice observed, almost conversational, as though they were discussing a sporting match rather than a battle for his life. Longer than your last exchange. You are learning faster than any vessel I have watched in centuries. It is a pity, truly, that speed alone will not save you tonight. Who are you? Issei ground out, dragging himself back to his feet through sheer stubbornness alone. You keep talking like you've done this before, like you've watched other gods get chosen, other kids get handed power they don't understand yet. What are you actually here for? The dark figure tilted its head again, considering the question with what felt, disturbingly, like patience. I am what is left when a universe finishes collapsing, it said finally. When creation runs out and destruction has nothing left to balance, something like me is what remains behind, hollow and hungry and very, very old. I have visited perhaps 40 realities since my own ended, boy. In each of them, I found the seed of a god of destruction, dormant, waiting, sometimes already claimed by a vessel like you, sometimes not. In every single one, I removed the seed before it could fully take root. Balance denied is easier to maintain than balance achieved. It does not build anything. It does not create the conditions that eventually produce things like me in the first place. You're trying to stop me from becoming what silence between storms wants me to become, Issei said slowly, understanding dawning cold and heavy in his chest. Because if it works, if I actually pull this off, it's one less broken universe out there for you to feed on eventually. Clever, the voice said, and there was something almost like respect buried beneath the hollow tone. Most vessels do not work that out until it is far too late to matter. It will not save you, but I confess I am pleased to have had the conversation before the end of it. It came at him again, and this time Issei felt something shift in the pit of his stomach, not fear exactly, but a cold, clarifying anger, the particular fury of understanding that the thing trying to kill you is not a mindless force of nature but a deliberate, calculating enemy that has done this exact thing to countless others before you and walked away from every single one of them satisfied. He reached for the stillness again, and this time, it came faster, easier, as though some part of him had finally, truly understood what it meant to want it badly enough. The world went quiet. His body moved. He did not dodge the dark figure's next strike so much as simply not be where the strike expected him to be, sliding past its extended arm and driving an elbow into the side of what might have been its head, feeling the strange dark matter of its form shudder and momentarily lose cohesion under the blow. For the first time, the dark figure actually took a step back to steady itself. Interesting, it murmured again, and now there was something colder threading through the hollow voice, the first hint of genuine irritation. You are not simply reaching for the stillness anymore. You are reaching for it with purpose behind it. That is a more dangerous combination than raw instinct alone. Yeah, Issei said, breathing hard, the old crooked grin finding its way back onto his bloodied face despite everything. Turns out I fight a lot better when I actually understand what I'm fighting for. Weird how that works. The dark figure straightened, gathering itself, and Issei felt the air around it thicken. Felt something building in the space between them that made every instinct in his body scream in warning even through the strange, silent clarity of the stillness he was holding onto. Then, very suddenly it stopped. The dark figure went rigid, its cold white eyes flicking upward, past Issei, past the ruined gate, towards some point in the night sky that Issei could not identify. Whatever it saw or sensed there, it did not like. The hungry, patient interest that had defined its every word since it arrived curdled instantly into something wary, almost cautious. Another guardian stirs elsewhere, it said, more to itself than to Issei now, the hollow voice tight with something that might have been frustration. Not here. Not for you. But close enough that I do not care to linger and find out what else this reality is hiding behind its curtain. Another time, small god. We will finish this conversation properly, when I am not obligated to be elsewhere. Wait, Issei surged forward, but the dark figure was already dissolving, its form unraveling into black smoke that thinned and vanished into the ordinary night air as though it had never been there at all, leaving behind nothing but scorched earth, a shattered gate, and a courtyard full of devils staring after it in stunned, ringing silence. Rias reached him a heartbeat later, both hands gripping his shoulders hard enough to bruise, checking him over with frantic, practiced efficiency even as her eyes stayed locked on his face. Are you hurt? How badly? Aquino, I need healing over here right now. I'm okay, Issei managed, though the words came out slurred with exhaustion. The stillness finally fully draining out of him and leaving behind a body that felt like it had been run over by a truck several times in a row. I'm okay, Bucho. It's gone. Whatever it was, it's gone for now. It said things, Kiba said grimly, arriving at a run with Zenobia close behind, both of them scanning the surrounding darkness for any further sign of movement. We heard some of it, near the end. Something about other guardians. Other realities. This wasn't just some monster wandering into Ko by accident, was it? No, Issei said quietly, sinking down onto the broken stone of the gate's foundation as Akino's healing magic began to knit the worst of his injuries back together. No, I don't think it was an accident at all. Chapter 9. Silence Between Storms was waiting for him in the gray plain that night, standing with an unusual stillness of his own, arms folded, expression unreadable in a way that made Issei's stomach tighten before either of them had said a single word. You fought a devourer, the god said without preamble. One of the entities left behind when a universe's balance collapses entirely and destruction consumes everything, including, eventually, itself, until only a hollow, hungry echo remains. I did not expect one to find you this quickly. I underestimated how much attention my own actions 3,000 years ago drew, even across the vast distances separating one collapsing reality from another. It said it's erased other gods of destruction before they could fully take root, Issei said. Other realities. 40 of them, it said. It's been doing this on purpose. Hunting them down. Yes, Silence Between Storms said simply, no attempt to soften the admission. That is precisely what a devourer does. It cannot create anything of its own any longer, having burned through whatever creative capacity its original universe once possessed. All it can do now is consume, and a universe with a properly seated god of destruction is a universe with balance, and balance, over time, produces abundance. And abundance is precisely the kind of thing a devourer needs eventually in order to keep existing at all. It does not attack out of malice, exactly. It attacks out of a hunger it cannot control and does not particularly want to control. That's not exactly comforting. I did not say it to comfort you. I said it because you deserve to understand exactly what you are up against now, rather than facing it blind. The god's blood-red eyes studied him with something that might have been apology, buried deep beneath layers of ancient, weary composure. I should have told you sooner. I did not expect the devourer that has been tracking my movements to arrive so quickly, and I confess I allowed myself the comfortable assumption that we had more time before this particular danger became relevant to your training. That was a mistake on my part, and I am sorry for it. Issei absorbed this in silence for a long moment, sitting down heavily on the strange gray ground, still feeling the ache of the night's battle in every muscle despite the dream logic of the space around them. Is it going to come back? Almost certainly. Devourers do not give up on a target once they have identified genuine potential, and you demonstrated a great deal of potential tonight, more than I expected this early in your training, if I am honest. A pause. It withdrew because it sensed another guardian stirring nearby, something older and more dangerous than itself, and it chose caution over confrontation. That guardian was not me, for what it's worth. I do not know yet what it was. That is, itself, mildly concerning. Great. More mysteries. Issei rubbed both hands over his tired face. Okay. So what do I do? How do I get strong enough to actually beat this thing instead of just barely surviving it, and getting lucky with good timing? Silence Between Storms considered the question for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, sat down across from Issei on the gray ground itself, folding his legs beneath him in a posture that felt, for the first time since they had met, less like a god addressing a mortal and more like one tired soul sitting with another. The stillness you touch tonight, the fragment of what will one day become ultra instinct if you keep reaching for it, is only half of what I promise you, the god said. The other half, the destruction itself, the raw power to unmake and remake at will, remains almost entirely untouched inside you. You have been so focused on the instinct, on learning to move without fear, that you have not yet begun to learn how to strike without limit. That changes starting tonight. A small, dense sphere of violet light appeared floating between them, no larger than a fist, pulsing with a slow, patient rhythm. This is a fragment of true destructive energy, Silence Between Storms said. Not an attack. Not a technique. A seed, the same as the one I planted in you at the very beginning, except this one exists outside your body, where you can study its shape before learning to summon its equivalent from within yourself. Watch closely, Issei Hayadu. What I am about to show you cannot be taught through words alone. The god raised one hand, and the small violet sphere expanded outward with terrifying, silent speed, and where it touched the endless gray ground, the ground itself simply ceased to exist, not blasted apart, not scorched, but erased entirely down to some depth Issei could not begin to measure, a perfect, seamless absence spreading outward in a widening circle before finally, gently, stopping at a boundary only the god himself seemed to control. Destruction, Silence Between Storms said quietly, watching the vast, silent crater with an expression that held, even after presumably centuries of casual demonstrations exactly like this one, a note of genuine reverence, is not violence. Violence breaks things, tears them, leaves wreckage behind that can, in time, be studied and rebuilt and understood. True destruction leaves nothing behind at all, not even the memory of what was destroyed, if wielded with sufficient precision. It is the opposite of creation in the truest possible sense, the unhappening of a thing rather than merely its ending. He turned to look at Issei directly. It is also, without question, the single most dangerous ability you will ever hold in your hands, and I will not begin teaching you to wield it until I am satisfied you understand exactly what it costs to use carelessly. What does it cost? Everything you did not mean to unmake alongside your intended target, the god said simply. A god of destruction who loses control, even briefly, even with the best of intentions, can erase far more than an enemy. I have seen it happen. I have, on one occasion very long ago, done it myself, and I have spent longer regretting that single moment than I care to describe to you tonight. The weight in the ancient voice was unmistakable now, old grief worn smooth by centuries but never fully healed over. So we will begin slowly. Control before power, every single time, no exceptions, regardless of how urgently your world may eventually need the power itself. Do you understand me, Issei Hayada? This is not a request. It is the one rule I will not bend on, no matter what threat comes hunting for you next. Issei looked at the vast, silent crater where a section of the endless gray plain had simply stopped existing, and felt, for the first time since accepting this strange and terrible gift, the full and sobering weight of exactly what he had agreed to carry. I understand, he said quietly. Control first. I promise. Good, Silence Between Storms said, and something in his ancient, weary posture eased very slightly, as though a fear he had not voiced aloud had just been, at least partially, set to rest. Then let us begin. Slowly, carefully, and precisely, the way it should always have been taught in the first place. Chapter 10. The weeks that followed settled into a strange and demanding rhythm, one that stretched Issei thinner than he had ever been stretched in his life, and yet, somehow, left him feeling more solidly himself than he had felt in months. By day, there was school, ordinary and grounding in its own small way, Matsuda and Motohama still arguing about swimsuit magazines with a blissful obliviousness to the fact that their friend had, several weeks prior, been offered cosmic responsibility for the balance of an entire universe. By afternoon, there was physical training with the peerage, sparring sessions that grew steadily more serious as Rias insisted, over Issei's mild protests, that everyone needed to be prepared for the possibility of the Devourer's return. By night, there was the gray plain, and Silence Between Storms, and the slow, careful, maddeningly patient work of learning to hold a fragment of destructive power in his open palm without letting it slip its careful boundaries even a single inch. He failed more often than he succeeded, in those early nights. The first time he tried to summon even the smallest seed of destructive energy on his own, it flickered into existence for less than a second before collapsing entirely, leaving him gasping and disoriented on the gray ground while Silence Between Storms watched with patient, unbothered calm. The second time, it held for nearly 3 seconds before spiraling briefly out of his control, carving an uneven gouge through the ground beside him that made the god's expression sharpen with real alarm for one heartbeat before the danger passed. You are trying to force it, Silence Between Storms told him, again and again, in one form or another, across dozens of failed attempts. Destruction is not summoned through effort, boy. It is summoned through permission. You must decide absolutely and completely that the thing in front of you is meant to stop existing, without hesitation, without a flicker of doubt creeping in halfway through. Doubt is what causes the power to slip its boundaries. Certainty is what keeps it contained. That's easier said than done when I don't actually want to erase anything, Issei admitted one exhausted night, sitting slumped on the gray ground after his latest failed attempt had fizzled out into nothing. I don't want to be the guy who's totally certain about unmaking stuff, if I'm honest. That feels like exactly the kind of certainty that turns a person into someone I wouldn't want to be. Something in the god's ancient face shifted at that, an expression that Issei was slowly learning to recognize as quiet, surprised approval. That hesitation, silence between storms said, is precisely why I believe you were the right choice for this gift, even though it is also, currently, the thing standing between you and mastering it. Every god of destruction I have ever known or heard tell of has had to walk that same narrow line, boy. Certain enough to wield the power safely, humble enough to never stop questioning whether it should be wielded at all. Lose either half of that balance, and you become something dangerous, either useless or monstrous, with very little safe ground in between. So how do I actually thread that needle then? Slowly, the god said, not unkindly. One deliberate, honest attempt at a time. There is no shortcut through this particular lesson. I would not give you one even if it existed, and so Issei kept trying. Night after night, the small seed of violet light flickering into and out of existence in his open palm, growing steadily more stable with each attempt, holding for 4 seconds, then 6, then, on one memorable night nearly a month into his training, a full 10 seconds without a single flicker of instability, held steady and controlled and entirely, deliberately his. Silence between storms watched that particular achievement in silence for a long moment before speaking. 10 seconds of stable destructive energy, the god said finally, quietly, roughly 1 month after first being handed this gift. Issei Hayadu, I want you to understand something, and I want you to actually hear it rather than simply nodding along politely the way mortals often do when gods attempt sincerity. It took the last vessel I trained, in the universe before this one, nearly 11 years to reach the exact milestone you just reached tonight. 11 years, and he was, by every measure available to me, considerably more naturally gifted with raw destructive potential than you currently are. Issei stared at him, stunned. 11 years? What happened to him? He is fine, silence between storms said, something old and complicated moving behind his ancient eyes. He simply chose, eventually, a different path than the one we walked together, and I do not begrudge him that choice even now. But that is a story for another night, if I choose to tell it at all. The god's expression sharpened back into something more immediate, more urgent. What matters tonight is this. You are progressing at a pace I genuinely did not believe possible for a mortal frame to sustain. That is not merely good news, Issei Hayada. It is also, I suspect, going to draw attention faster than either of us would prefer. As if summoned by the very words themselves, the endless gray plain trembled, once, a low and distant tremor that Issei felt more in his bones than through any of his ordinary senses, and silence between storms went suddenly, completely still, his ancient eyes fixed on some point far beyond the visible horizon. Speaking of attention, the god said quietly, and for the first time since Issei had known him, there was something in his voice that sounded, unmistakably, like genuine concern. Chapter 11. The Underworld's Emergency Council convened 3 days later in a chamber Issei had never seen before, deep beneath the Gremry ancestral estate, a vast circular room lined with the crests of the 72 pillars, most of them faded now, relics of a system that had bent and reformed itself many times over the centuries but never quite broken entirely. Surzex Lucifer sat at the head of a long obsidian table, and though his expression remained, as always, warm and composed, Issei could see the tension threaded through his shoulders, the particular strain of a leader who had spent the last several days fielding reports of impossible destruction from across multiple border regions. 3 more outposts, Surzex said without preamble, once Rias's peerage had taken their seats along the table's lower end. All showing the same erasure signature as the first incident. And now, apparently a direct encounter here in the human world, in Ko itself, involving my sister's peerage and, from what I've been told, involving Issei's new abilities directly. His gaze settled on Issei with an expression that mixed genuine concern with something almost like curiosity. I would like to hear, in your own words, exactly what happened, and exactly what this entity said to you. Every detail matters at this point. Issei recounted the encounter as carefully as he could, the Devourer's words about erasing dormant gods of destruction across 40 different realities, its retreat in the face of some unnamed guardian stirring nearby, the cold, patient hunger underlying every word it had spoken. The council chamber grew progressively quieter as he spoke, several of the older devils present exchanging uneasy glances that suggested this was not, entirely, unfamiliar territory to at least some of them. There are old records, said a stern-faced woman Issei did not recognize, seated several places down the table, introduced earlier simply as a senior archivist of the Gremory household, referencing entities matching this description, though nothing so detailed as an actual conversation. The oldest texts call them ending things, beings born from the death of balance itself. If even half of what this creature told the boy is accurate, we are dealing with something considerably older and more dangerous than any threat this council has faced in living memory. Can it be fought conventionally? Serzex asked, or is Issei's involvement now, unfortunately, a necessity rather than a choice? Conventional force barely marked it, Kiba said grimly. I watched Issei land solid hits with whatever new ability he's developing, and even those only staggered it briefly. I don't believe ordinary devil magic, however powerful, would do more than delay it. Serzex was quiet for a long moment, steepling his fingers, his gaze distant and calculating in the particular way Issei had come to associate with a leader weighing costs he did not want to weigh at all. Then I have to ask you directly, Issei, he said finally. Not as your king's brother, and not as the Lucifer, but simply as someone who has come to genuinely care about your well-being over these past years. Are you prepared for what continuing down this path is going to demand of you? Because from everything you've described, this is not a threat that resolves itself quickly, and it is not a threat that allows you the luxury of choosing when and where you engage it. Issei thought about the gray plane, about 10 unbroken seconds of stable destructive light held steady in his open palm, about a god's quiet, patient insistence on control before power, every single time, no exceptions. He thought about Rias's fear the night of the attack, about Kiba's steady, unwavering trust, about Asia's small, determined promise that none of them would let him carry this alone. No, he said honestly. I'm not fully prepared. Not yet. But I'm getting there faster than I think anyone expected, including the God who gave me this power in the first place. And I'm not going to stop training just because the timeline got moved up on me. He met Serzex's gaze steadily. What I need from this council, if I'm being honest, isn't permission to keep training. I need time. Every day this thing isn't actively attacking Ko is another day I get stronger before it comes back. If there's anything the underworld can do to buy me that time, border defenses, early warning systems, anything at all, that's what would actually help right now. Serzex studied him for a long moment, and then, slowly, something that looked almost like pride settled over his composed features. Very well, he said. I will authorize additional warding along every known boundary point, and I will have my most trusted people monitoring for any sign of this entity's return, in the underworld or elsewhere. In the meantime, Issei, train. Grow as quickly and as safely as this process allows, and know that you do not carry the responsibility of facing this thing alone, whatever it might have implied to you that night. This council, and this family, stands behind you completely. Around the table, one by one, the assembled devils inclined their heads in solemn agreement, and Issei felt something in his chest loosen very slightly, the particular relief of discovering that the weight he had been quietly bracing to carry alone was, in fact, being shared by more shoulders than he had realized. Chapter 12. The Devourer returned on a rain-soaked evening 6 weeks later, and this time, it did not come alone. Issei felt it before he saw it, a cold, hollow pressure crawling up his spine as he walked home from a late training session with Kiba, both of them instantly alert, instantly scanning the empty, rain-slicked street for any sign of movement. The streetlights flickered, one by one, down the length of the block, and out of the deepening dark between them stepped not one shifting black figure but three, arranged in a loose triangle, cold white eyes fixed unerringly on Issei from a dozen different angles at once. You have grown, the familiar hollow voice observed, emanating from the central figure, tinged now with something colder and more calculating than the almost conversational curiosity of their first encounter. Considerably more than I anticipated. I underestimated you, small god, and I do not enjoy being made to feel that particular sensation. So I have brought company this time, to correct the oversight. Kiba's sword was already free of its sheath, his stance dropping low and ready, but Issei caught his arm before he could step forward. Kiba, no, 3 of them. That's not a fight either of us walks away from if we split our attention trying to protect each other. Get clear. Call Rias. I mean it. Issei, I am not leaving you against 3 of these things. You're not leaving me, Issei said, and there was a new steadiness in his voice now, something calm and certain that had not been there 6 weeks earlier. You're getting back up, and you're staying alive to bring it, because I need people I trust watching my back on this. Not lying broken on the pavement because they refuse to listen to me. Please, Kiba, trust me on this. Kiba held his gaze for one long, agonized second, jaw tight, and then, exactly as he had the first time, nodded once and sprinted off into the rain, already reaching for his phone. The 3 devourers watched him go without concern, entirely unbothered, cold white eyes turning back to Issei with patient, hungry attention. Alone again, the central figure observed, almost pleased. Good. Let us see what a month and a half of desperate training has actually purchased you, small god. Issei closed his eyes for the space of a single breath, reaching down into the stillness that had, over the past weeks, become steadily easier to find, steadily more willing to answer his call even outside the safety of the gray plane and its careful, controlled dreamscape. When his eyes opened again, something silver and calm and unafraid looked back out through them, and the rain around him seemed, for just a moment, to slow to a gentle, floating drift. The 3 devourers attacked as one, and Issei moved to meet them. What followed was unlike anything he had experienced in the Grey Plain, unlike any sparring match with Kiba or Zenobia, unlike anything the ordinary rules of combat had ever prepared him for. 3 opponents, moving with inhuman coordination, attacking from every angle simultaneously, and Issei's body answered each threat a fraction of a second before it fully materialized, weaving between strikes that should have killed him a dozen times over, countering with blows that, while they did not yet carry the full weight of controlled destructive power, carried more than enough force to make each of the 3 entities stagger in turn. It was not enough to win outright. He knew that within the first 30 seconds, knew it in the cold, clear way the stillness allowed him to know things without the interference of panic or hope clouding the assessment. 3 devourers, working in coordinated concert, simply outmatched what he currently had access to, however dramatically that access had grown over the past 6 weeks. But it was, for the first time, genuinely close enough that the entity's hollow, patient confidence began, gradually, audibly, to fray at the edges. This is not possible, one of the 3 said, its voice tighter now, less composed, as Issei ducked beneath a clawed strike and drove a controlled fragment of violet light, barely a second's worth, directly into its shifting chest, watching it stagger backward with a full third of its form simply, cleanly gone. 6 weeks. This is not possible in 6 weeks. Guess you should have killed me the first night instead of getting spooked off by whatever that other guardian was, Issei said, breathing hard but grinning despite the exhaustion, despite the rain soaking through his clothes, despite the very real possibility that he was about to lose this fight regardless of how close he had managed to make it. Bet you're regretting that now. The central figure's cold white eyes narrowed, and Issei felt, rather than saw, the 3 entities shift their coordination, abandoning individual attacks in favor of something more unified, more dangerous, dark matter beginning to pool and merge between them into a single, vastly larger shape looming up out of the rain-soaked dark. We will not make that mistake twice, the merged voice said, hollow and enormous now, shaking the wet pavement beneath Issei's feet. This ends tonight, small god, one way or another. Issei planted his feet against the rain-slicked ground, feeling the last reserves of his strength gathering themselves for whatever came next, and somewhere very far away, in the endless gray plain that existed only in the space between sleeping and waking, he felt silence between storms stir, alert now, watching, and for the very first time since this entire impossible journey had beginning, cautiously, to consider whether it might finally be time to intervene directly after all. Chapter 13. The merged devourer rose against the rain-streaked sky, a towering column of shifting black matter easily 3 times Issei's height now. Cold white points of light scattered unevenly across its surface like a dozen watching eyes, and Issei understood, with the particular clarity the stillness allowed him, that whatever came next would either be the moment his training finally proved itself, or the last thing he ever did. He did not run. Running had never once been an option his body seriously considered, not since a fallen angel's spear of light had first taught him, years ago, exactly how little safety there was in retreat when the people you loved were still somewhere behind you. Butcho's going to kill me for this, he muttered to himself, and then, planting his feet, he raised both hands and reached, not for the stillness this time, but past it, down into the second gift silence between storms had spent 6 patient weeks teaching him to hold, the small, careful seed of controlled destruction that lived now, however precariously, within his own 2 palms. Control before power. Every single time. No exceptions. He held on to that promise like a lifeline as the merge devourer surged forward, and instead of dodging, instead of trusting the stillness to carry him clear the way it had all night, Issei stood his ground and let a sphere of violet light bloom outward from his open hands, smaller than the crater silence between storms had carved into the gray plain during their very first lesson, but stable, controlled, entirely and deliberately his own. The merged devourer's leading edge met the sphere and simply stopped existing. The enormous, hollow scream that followed shook the rain right out of the air for several long seconds, the towering column of dark matter recoiling violently, a full third of its mass gone as cleanly and completely as if it had never been there at all. Issei staggered, the effort of holding the destructive seed stable under that much pressure draining him faster than anything he had attempted in the gray plain, sweat and rain mixing on his face as he forced himself to stay upright, to keep the sphere from either collapsing or, far more dangerously, slipping its careful boundaries and spreading further than he intended. Impossible, the wounded devourer snarled, its voice fractured now, no longer smoothly unified, 3 distinct undertones bleeding back through the single merged form. That is not instinct. That is not reflex. That is the seed itself, stable, in a vessel less than 2 months old. Yeah, well, Issei gasped, forcing the sphere back down into a tight, contained point of light cupped carefully in his palm. I had a really patient teacher. Turns out that helps. The wounded creature drew back, its remaining mass coiling defensively, cold white eyes flickering with something that, for the first time all night, looked unmistakably like fear rather than hunger. This is not a fight I can win tonight, it said, more to itself than to Issei, the fractured voice tight with reluctant calculation. Not against this rate of growth. Not without reinforcement. Then maybe don't come back, Issei said, though even as he said it, he understood, with the same cold clarity the stillness lent him, that it absolutely would come back, that this was only ever going to be the opening move in a much longer fight. The wounded devourer began to withdraw, dark matter thinning and dissolving back into the rain-soaked dark, but before it fully vanished, it paused, its remaining cold white eyes fixing on Issei one final time. You should know, small god, before I go, it said quietly, almost gently, the hunger in its voice giving way, briefly, to something that sounded disturbingly like genuine warning. The guardian that frightened me off on our first meeting. It was not one of your allies. I have had 6 weeks to consider what I sensed that night, and I no longer believe it was searching for you at all. I believe it was searching for something your world does not yet know is hidden inside it. Something considerably older than either of us. What are you talking about? Issei demanded, but the creature was already dissolving, its final words trailing off into the rain like smoke. Ask your god what happened to the last universe he tried to save, it said, and then it was gone entirely, leaving Issei alone in the rain-soaked street, breathing hard, exhausted down to his very bones, staring at the empty space where 3 monsters had stood only minutes before. Chapter 14. Rias and the others arrived less than 2 minutes later, skidding to a stop at the sight of Issei sitting slumped against the rain-slicked lamppost, soaked through, exhausted, but unmistakably, gratefully alive. Rias reached him first, dropping to her knees beside him without any regard for the puddles soaking through her clothes, both hands framing his face as she checked him over with the same frantic thoroughness as their first encounter with the devourer weeks earlier. You're okay, she breathed, something between relief and disbelief coloring every word. Kiba said 3 of them. He said you sent him away to get help and then you stayed. You stayed and fought 3 of them alone. Wasn't exactly a choice I felt great about, Issei admitted, managing a tired, crooked smile despite the exhaustion dragging at every part of him. But it worked out. Mostly. I actually hurt one of them, Bucho. Really hurt it. The destruction thing, the control stuff silence between storms has been drilling into me, it worked. You could have died, Ria said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word, fear and pride tangled together in the particular way that had become achingly familiar over these past 2 months. You could have died out here alone, and none of us would have even known until it was already too late. I know, Issei said quietly, reaching up to cover one of her hands with his own. I know, and I'm sorry for scaring you. But Bucho, I need you to understand something. This isn't a fight I can hand off to anyone else. Whatever this power actually is, whatever it's going to eventually become, I'm the only one who can carry it. That means sometimes, some nights, I'm going to have to stand in front of something alone, because the alternative is watching people I love get hurt trying to stand there with me against a threat they can't actually touch. He held her gaze steadily, gently. I promise you, I am never going to stop coming home. But I can't promise you every fight is going to look like the ones we're used to fighting together. That part's changed now, and I think it's going to keep changing. Rias was quiet for a long moment, rain dripping steadily from both their soaked hair, and then, slowly, she nodded, something fierce and sad and fiercely proud settling over her expression all at once. Then I need you to promise me something else, she said. Not that you'll never fight alone. I understand now that I can't ask that of you fairly. But promise me you'll always come back and tell us everything afterward. Every detail. No hiding how close it actually was, no softening it to spare our feelings. If I can't stand beside you in the fight itself, the very least you owe me is honesty about what actually happened in it. Deal, Issei said, and meant it completely. That night, in the Grey Plain, Issei relayed the Devourer's final words to silence between storms exactly as he remembered them, watching the ancient god's expression carefully as he spoke. Ask your god what happened to the last universe he tried to save. For a long, long moment, silence between storms said nothing at all, his ancient face carved into something distant and unreadable, old grief surfacing slowly behind eyes the color of dried blood. I told you once, the god said finally, quietly, that I had, on one occasion very long ago, lost control of the very power I am now teaching you to wield carefully. I did not tell you the whole of that story, because I did not believe you needed to carry it yet, on top of everything else. I believe, now, that I was wrong to withhold it. He drew a slow, weighted breath, the first time Issei had ever seen him do something so distinctly, achingly human. Sit down, Issei Hayadu. This will take some time to tell properly, and I think, after tonight, you have more than earned the right to hear it in full. Issei sat, the rain-soaked street of his own world falling away entirely from his thoughts, and across the endless Grey Plain, an ancient god of destruction began, at last, to speak of the universe he had lost, and the price that loss had carved into him, and the very careful, very deliberate reasons he had spent 3,000 years searching for a vessel who might, just possibly, learn to carry this power without ever repeating his oldest and deepest mistake. Somewhere far beyond the Grey Plain, in realities Issei could not yet see and did not yet understand, something ancient and patient continued, undisturbed, to watch his growth with an interest that had nothing at all to do with balance, and everything to do with a purpose far older than any single collapsing universe. But that, too, was a story for another night. Chapter 15. His name, in the last days of that universe, was not important. Silence between storms began, settling onto the gray ground with the particular heaviness of someone about to carry a weight they had spent centuries trying to set down. What mattered was that he was young, as you are young, and stubborn, as you are stubborn, and I chose him for exactly the same reasons I eventually chose you. He got up. Every single time, against every impossible odds, he got up. I believed, as I still believe about you, that this quality was the single most important ingredient in surviving what I was about to hand him. What happened? Issei asked quietly, though some cold, dreading part of him already suspected he did not want the answer. He grew quickly, faster than I expected, faster than was, in hindsight, safe. Not unlike you. The god's ancient eyes were fixed on some point far beyond the gray horizon, seeing, Issei suspected, a different sky entirely. There was an enemy in his universe, powerful, cruel, threatening everyone he loved, and he grew desperate to protect them the way you have grown desperate to protect your own peerage. Desperation is a dangerous companion to destructive power, Issei Hayato. It erodes the careful boundaries control requires. It whispers that just this once, urgency matters more than precision. He lost control, Issei said softly. Once. Only once. It was enough. Silence between storms closed his eyes, and for the first time since Issei had known him, something that looked unmistakably like tears gathered at the corners without ever quite falling. He meant to erase the enemy threatening his home. He erased the enemy. He also erased the city the enemy was standing in, and everyone inside it, everyone he had grown that power specifically to protect. 300,000 souls, gone in less time than it takes to draw a single breath, because desperation had worn through the boundary between what he intended and what the power actually did. The great plain fell utterly silent around them, and Issei found he could not speak at all, horror and grief tangling together in his chest at the sheer, unimaginable scale of what the god was describing. He did not forgive himself. Silence between storms continued, very quietly now. I do not believe he ever will, wherever he currently exists in whatever remains of that shattered reality. He chose, in the aftermath, to set the power down entirely, to walk away from being a god of destruction rather than risk ever touching that boundary again, and I did not stop him, because I understood, better than anyone, exactly why he needed to make that choice. I failed him, Issei. Not by giving him the power, by failing to teach him, thoroughly enough, soon enough, exactly how desperation corrodes control. I was too eager to see him grow strong quickly, and eagerness cost 300,000 lives that should never have been on that ledger at all. That's why you've been so strict about it, Issei said slowly, understanding settling cold and heavy in his chest. Control before power, no exceptions, every single time. It's not just caution. It is penance, the god said simply, opening his eyes at last, meeting Issei's gaze directly, ancient and raw and entirely without the careful, weary composure Issei had grown used to seeing there. And it is also, I hope, wisdom purchased at a price I would give almost anything to have paid differently. I will not make that same mistake with you, Issei Hayato. I will slow your training, even when your world's need grows urgent, even when every instinct in both of us screams to move faster. Because the alternative is a version of you standing where he once stood, staring at the wreckage of exactly the people you meant to save. Issei sat with that for a long, heavy moment, the rain-soaked memory of tonight's battle still fresh in his mind, the seed of destructive light he had held stable in his own two palms only hours earlier suddenly feeling far heavier, far more dangerous, than it had felt in the moment of triumph. Thank you for telling me, he said finally. I mean it. I know that wasn't easy. No, the god agreed. It was not. But you deserve the truth of what you are carrying, in full, rather than a comfortable fraction of it. And I think, after tonight, after watching you hold that seed steady under real pressure for the first time, you have proven yourself ready to carry the whole of this story rather than only the parts that make the training easier to bear. They sat together in silence for a while after that, an old god and a young vessel, the gray plains stretching empty and patient around them in every direction, and somewhere, impossibly far away and yet closer than either of them fully understood, something ancient continued to watch, waiting, unhurried, for the moment when Issei Hayato's growth finally became impossible to ignore any longer. There's something else, Issei said eventually, breaking the long quiet. The devourer said the guardian that scared it off wasn't looking for me. Said it was looking for something already hidden in my world. Something older than either of you. Do you know what that means? Silence between storms was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally answered, his voice carried a weight Issei had not heard in it before, something that sounded, for the very first time, almost like genuine uncertainty from a being who had spent 3,000 years claiming to understand the shape of the universe better than almost anyone alive. I have my suspicions, the god said slowly. And I do not like any of them. But suspicion is not certainty, and I would rather investigate carefully before frightening you with possibilities that may yet prove unfounded. He rose to his feet, the great plain rippling faintly around him as though responding to some shift in his own composure. For now, rest, Issei Hayato. You have earned it tonight, more thoroughly than on any night since we began this journey together. Tomorrow, we return to training, harder than before, because I suspect, whatever is coming, We no longer have the luxury of unlimited time to prepare for it. The gray plane dissolved gently into formless dark, and Issei sank into sleep at last, carrying with him the weight of 300,000 souls he had never known, a promise he intended to keep no matter what it cost him, and the first faint, uneasy shadow of a mystery that would, before very much longer, pull him and everyone he loved into a story far larger than any of them had yet imagined. Chapter 16. Morning came gray and ordinary over Ko, sunlight filtering weakly through clouds that had not quite finished apologizing for the previous night's rain, and Issei walked to school with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, turning the god story over and over in his mind the way a tongue keeps returning to a sore tooth. 300,000 souls. A single moment of desperation. A boy who had gotten up every single time, just like Issei always got up, and had still, in the end, been undone not by weakness but by caring too much, too urgently, about the people directly in front of him. It was not a comfortable thought to carry into a school hallway full of ordinary students laughing over ordinary problems, but Issei found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he did not want to set it down either. It felt important to keep close. A reminder, sharp-edged and necessary, of exactly what he could become if he ever let urgency outrun patience. Rias found him at lunch, settling onto the rooftop bench beside him with 2 carefully packed bento boxes, the ordinary, grounding ritual they had shared more times than either of them could count over the past several years. She did not ask about the previous night immediately. She simply sat with him in comfortable silence for a while, letting the ordinary warmth of midday sun and the distant sound of the volleyball club's practice drift over both of them like something almost blessedly normal. "You've been quiet all morning," she said eventually, not quite a question. "Silence between storms told me something last night," Issei admitted. "About why he's so strict about the control stuff. About what happened the last time he trained someone like me." He told her the story, carefully, the way the god had told it to him, watching her face carefully as the weight of it settled over her features. "That's horrifying," Rias said quietly, when he finished. "And it explains a great deal about why you've come home some nights looking utterly wrung out from training that, as far as I can tell, mostly involves standing very still and holding a small light steady in your palm." "Yeah." Issei picked at his rice, appetite somewhat dampened by the morning's reflections. "I keep thinking about it. About how easy it would be, in the moment, with everything on the line, to just push, just this once. Just to get through whatever's happening. And how that's exactly the thought that cost him 300,000 people." Rias was quiet for a moment, considering. "Then let us be your control," she said finally, with a particular quiet firmness that had, over the years, become one of the things Issei loved most about her. "Not in the fight itself. I understand now that you may need to face some of this alone. But afterward. Before. In the moments where the choice about how hard to push still belongs to you rather than to the danger itself. Let us be the voices reminding you to slow down, when everything in you wants to speed up. That's not weakness, Issei. That's exactly the kind of support a person needs when they're carrying something this heavy." Something in Issei's chest loosened at that, warm and grateful and entirely unable to find the right words to properly express how much it meant. He settled, instead, for reaching over and squeezing her hand once, gently, and letting the gesture carry what words could not. They did not know, sitting together on that ordinary rooftop bench in the mild gray morning light, exactly what waited beyond the horizon of the coming weeks. They did not yet know the shape of the guardian the devourer had sensed and fled from, or the true reason something ancient had begun, quietly and patiently, watching Issei's impossible growth with an interest that reached far beyond simple balance. They did not know how soon the next test would arrive, or how much harder it would demand Issei push against the very limits silence between storms had spent 3,000 years learning, at devastating cost, never to cross carelessly again. They only knew, in that quiet, unremarkable moment, that whatever came next, they intended to face it exactly the way they had faced everything else since the day a broken, hopeful boy had first fallen into their strange and dangerous world, together, honestly, and without ever once asking any of them to carry the weight of it entirely alone. Far below the school, in a dream that had not yet been dreamed, an endless gray plain waited patiently for nightfall, and somewhere beyond even that, in corners of existence Issei Hayate had not yet learned to imagine, something old and deliberate continued its slow, careful approach, drawn inexorably toward a power still learning, one careful heartbeat at a time, exactly what it might someday become. Chapter 17. Training changed after that, in ways both subtle and profound. Silence between storms no longer simply summoned constructs for Issei to fight against. Now, each session began with a quiet, deliberate conversation about intention, about the difference between wanting to win and wanting to protect, about the narrow, careful space where those two desires could coexist without one corroding the other. Tell me why you are reaching for the stillness, the god would ask. Before every single exercise, patient and unhurried despite the ticking clock both of them could feel pressing against their backs. Because Rias is counting on me, Issei would answer, or Asia, or Kiba, or simply the ordinary, unremarkable people of Ko who would never know how close disaster had come to their quiet town on any given night. And each time, silence between storms would nod, satisfied, and only then would the training actually begin, because the god had come to believe, firmly and completely, that the shape of a person's why mattered every bit as much as the strength of their reach. Issei's control grew steadily under this new, more deliberate approach. 10 seconds of stable destructive light became 15, became 20, became, on one particularly demanding night nearly 3 weeks after the encounter with the 3 merged devourers, a full minute held without a single flicker of instability, the violet sphere resting calm and obedient in his open palm like something almost gentle, almost kind, despite the vast and terrible potential coiled within it. The stillness grew alongside it, no longer a fragile thing that slipped away after mere seconds but something Issei could, with effort and focus, hold for the better part of an entire sparring match now, his body moving with a fluid, unhesitating grace that left even Zenobia, who did not impress easily, watching him with open, startled respect during their increasingly rare evenly matched sessions. You're not the same guy who used to trip over his own feet during warm-ups, she told him one evening, wiping sweat from her brow after yet another sparring match that had ended, once again, with Issei's blade-flat palm resting lightly against her throat before she had even fully registered his movement. I mean that as a compliment, before you get weird about it. Feels weird either way, Issei admitted, offering her a hand up from where his last counter had put her on the mat. Some nights I still feel like the same idiot who just wanted to make it through high school without dying too many times. Other nights I feel like I'm turning into someone I don't fully recognize yet. Maybe both things can be true, Zenobia said, accepting his hand and hauling herself upright. Maybe you're just becoming a bigger version of exactly who you already were, instead of turning into someone else entirely. For what it's worth, that's the version of this I'd put my money on. Issei thought about that a great deal over the following days, turning it over alongside the god's old, sorrowful story, alongside Rias's quiet promise to help hold the line against desperation, alongside every ordinary, grounding moment that reminded him exactly why any of this mattered in the first place. He did not have an answer yet, not a complete one, but he found, increasingly, that he did not need a complete answer to keep moving forward one careful, deliberate step at a time. He was not the same boy who had fallen through an endless gray plain 2 months earlier, half dead and terrified and desperate for any answer at all to the question of how to protect the people he loved. He was still learning, still stumbling in the smaller, quieter ways that every serious pursuit eventually demands of the people who take it seriously, but the shape of who he was becoming had started, unmistakably, to solidify around the edges, patient and deliberate, and increasingly his own. 6 weeks after the encounter with the 3 merged devourers, on a quiet, unremarkable evening that gave absolutely no warning of what it was about to become, the sky above Ko Academy tore itself open for the second time, and something considerably older than any devourer stepped through into the waiting world, its ancient, patient attention already, unmistakably, fixed on the boy who had spent the last 2 months learning, one careful heartbeat at a time, exactly how much weight he was capable of carrying. There was no time left to wonder whether he was ready. There rarely is, in the moments that end up mattering most. There was only the tearing light overhead, and the ordinary street growing suddenly, unnaturally cold, and the old, familiar hum beneath his skin rising to meet whatever was about to arrive, steady now, certain now, entirely, finally his own. Issei Hayate closed his eyes for the space of a single breath, reached for the stillness that no longer felt borrowed or strange, and opened them again to face whatever the world had decided, on this particular unremarkable evening, to send his way next.